All right, this is Jim Kwik. I'm your host and also your guest for the Superhero You Brain Power for Success Summit. I'm honored to be able to share this time with you. And so I want this to be a good coaching session with you. If we have, and I know we have tens of thousands of people that signed up for the summit all around the world, I want you to feel like this is you and I having a conversation because if you've seen my work, you've probably seen me some videos or maybe have been in participants in our classes and our speed reading, our memory programs, been in an audience, and you've seen me do demonstrations on stage where I'll memorize a room full of people's names, or they'll pass around a microphone and each give me a different word or a different number and such. And I always tell people I don't do this to impress you. I really do this to express to you what's possible. And because once upon a time I couldn't do this. And in fact, when I first got started on this journey, contrary to what a lot of people think, I had my learning challenges. I had a very bad head injury when I was 5 years old. I could never read anything well. I could have trouble focusing all the time, and I always thought I was broken and that something was wrong with me. And what I realized is there's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's just a trained memory and an untrained memory. And so this session that we're here together today for the next 60 minutes or so, I just want to help train your brain and give you some new reference points. This is not a magic pill, but it is a magic process. And if you've purchased some of the replays and got our Quick Learning A to Z program, you know what I'm about to talk about, which is that what you put in is what you get out. All right, that your mind is like a muscle, or your brain is like a muscle. It's not, but it acts metaphorically like that it grows stronger with use. All right, and you've learned from our previous, some of our doctor friends who've been on these calls, whether it's Dr. Ned Holloway or Dr. Rudy Tanzi, or whether it's Michael Gelb, that by strengthening and doing these exercises of the mind, you make new connections, right? There's neuroplasticity, which is learning, and that's what today's all about. Because I'm going to test you also with your memory. I'm going to give you a list of words on this session, and I'm going to ask you how many you remembered. And I'd like you to share, how you were able to do, how many of the words you were able to remember. And then I'm going to show you a couple of techniques on how to remember more of those words, for example. 60 minutes is a lot, especially when we're talking about accelerated learning. If you could walk away with anything, and say, wow, that was, a good 60 minutes, very well spent, in what ways would you like to remember better? Right? Because it's not like all the times people say, I want a better memory, but it's kind of like saying, oh, I want to be better at sports. Well, what sport specifically would you like to be better at? And then there's all these different great techniques or skills in order to be able to do that and to get better in those kind of areas. What I want to do is I want to go over a couple of ground rules. I want you to, and by the way, if you haven't already watched my replay, before this summit started, I did a live stream, about 80 or 90 minutes of prep on how to get the most out of this series. And a good part of it had to do with note taking, how to take notes, and also how to remember. And if you've gone through it, if you click on the replays tab, you could watch that full video stream. And in there, I teach you an ancient memory technique, kind of a lost art of memory, to be able to memorize a speech without notes. And that technique, that location method, is very powerful. And I know I've gotten a lot of emails and different posts about people who've applied it to memorize some of the highlights of some of these calls. So I would recommend you do that. You could also, another resource that's absolutely free is superheroyou.com, superheroyou.com. It's a site that we created for you to be able to be a bridge to get you from where you are to where you want to go mentally. And many of you know we host an annual Brain Power Conference where we bring in some of the top minds in the world, the Justice League of Geniuses, if you will, just like what we have done with this online summit. And we put some really exclusive private video footage from that event right on that site. So if you'd like to watch some of that, in comments, please do. And then the last resource also is the bookstore. So if you'd like, you could go to superheroyou.com/bookstore and get any of the books that any of these great experts have. So those are just 3 really good resources. All right, so let's sit up and be in the absolute perfect kind of learning state. Be in the state that you want to be in. we're going to have Mary Lou Henner talking about how to remember things in your past. She remembers her personal history extremely well. She has a great book on it about total memory makeover. She's one of 12 people in the world that have highly superior autobiographical memory, and she's in this series. Let's give you a really quick overview of names. And I have a video on Superhero U. It was one of your free gifts also, but I could go through it a little bit just as a brief overview for those of you, because I think review is extremely important for what we're talking about. Okay, so how to remember names. Now, how important is it to remember someone's name? Is it a little bit or a lot, right? The name is like the sweetest sound to a person's ear. Say you're an entrepreneur. I don't know how many entrepreneurs are listening to this, or you have a relationship with a human being, but it's really important to show somebody that you care, and it's really hard to show somebody you're going to care for their business or their future or their family or their health or whatever it is that you want to sell them if you don't care enough just to remember their name. Right? Like, have you ever been talking to somebody and then seconds later they give you their name and it just disappears? Or you're talking to somebody and whose name you really should know, and for the life of you, you don't remember what their name is. And what makes it worse is when that person has the nerve to remember your name. Or you're talking to somebody and whose name you should know, and then somebody who you do know comes up and you're in a position where you have to introduce those two people. So remembering names is very important. So let me give you a few really quick tips. All right. The first thing I always tell people is remember MOM, remember mom. And the reason why it's an acronym, obviously, but these are the three keys for better memory. If you're ever forgetting something, usually one of these three things is not there. The first M stands for, and actually, let me ask you a question. Let's say you're really bad with names, but let's say somebody you know has a suitcase of $100,000 cash, or whatever the equivalent is for for your country, that currency. Only if you just remember their name. How many people are likely to remember that person's name, right? A lot. And you didn't use a technique. What happened is you were just motivated. So the first M in mom stands for motivation. You always want to do a motivation check with yourself. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how badly do you want to, or how greatly do you want to remember that person's name? Or remember where you put the keys? Or remember what you're studying? Because motivation, what is your motive for action? Remember that everyone's, always tuned into their favorite radio station. It's WIIFM. WIIFM. We get it here in New York. You get it in Rockland, and you get it in Ontario, Canada. You get it in Australian capital. Like, everybody gets it everywhere. It's what's in it for me. All right. So you want to tune in to what's in it for you. So relative to names, ask yourself, why do I want to remember the person's name? Because if you can't come up with one reason, what's likely to happen? You're probably not going to remember it. Because we write this down or tweet it out. Reasons precede results. Reasons precede results. Reasons come first, and then results come second. Right? I always tell people that I think that the success formula that I'm always attuned to is what I call H cubed. H cubed. It goes from your head to your heart to your hands. You could sit in a room and keep things in your head, affirm things, think things, visualize things. But if it just stays in your head and it doesn't get to your hands, which means action, then what's usually missing is the second H, which is your heart. The emotion, the energy of motion. And because that's the fuel, right? That fuels the car and the action. So I always want to plug into that emotion. So ask yourself, why do I want to remember this? And let's say it's a 4. Then I would ask myself, what do I need to think or believe or do to make it a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 10? Even handling procrastination, you could do the same thing. Like, we have a speed reading program that we teach, and it requires 20 minutes of practice each day for 30 days to be able to change that habit. But some people procrastinate and they don't get the kind of results. And people will say, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated are you to do this? And they'll say, well, it's really only a 4. Well, what would you need to do in your mind to make it a 6 or a 7? Well, I just have to think about, like, how good it would feel to be able to get done with my studies. I would have to think about how good it would be able to read, 2 books on health a week. I would need to be able to be able to think about how great my XYZ, right? So motivation. The O in mom stands for observation. Observation. And this is critical, again, for remembering what you read, for remembering like facts. Like we do programs where we teach people like how to remember the 50 capitals for the states, or all the presidents, and by number, and the chemical elements and everything else like that. But we're able to do it because we teach people their motivation, we teach them their observation. The observation is important because a lot of people blame their retention when they can't remember something, when it really is a matter of attention. Attention. And so observation. So for example, if you imagine a circle or draw a circle on your notepad, and I ask you to draw the back of a dime, or whatever currency for where you live, what does that look like? Do you really know? Do you know what the back of a dime actually looks like? Or, for example, if you use Google, which a lot of us use Google, right? And can you tell me what colors those letters are? The G, the O, the G, the L, and the E. What color is that first G? What color is the O? What color is the second O? What color is the second G, the L, and the E? Without cheating, obviously, right? And so that's an observation, and that's a skill that could be trained. And so just like, remembering something, you can't, there's a difference between looking at something and really seeing it. And just as there's a difference between looking at something and seeing it, there's a big difference between hearing something and really listening to it. So a lot of people are, for example, forgetting a name, but they're not forgetting their name. They're just not even paying attention to begin with. And the best thing I could recommend that you do is be, as our friend Eckhart Tolle talks about, not my friend, but just all of our friends, the power of now, be present. Right? Be present. Because you know what people are normally doing when they're studying, or normally doing when they're trying to remember a name? They have this inner conversation going on inside their head, this inner voice. And that inner voice is what's keeping you from remembering. Because if you're meeting someone fresh for the first time and you are talking to yourself, like, how do I know this person? What should I say? And dot, 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 dot. Then there's two conversations going on at once. There's one with you and that person, and then there's one with you and you. And which one do you think you're going to pay more attention to? You and a stranger, or you and yourself? And so really it's you, you're going to pay attention more to you and yourself, and you're not going to hear the names. So you want to observe and pay attention. By the way, that self-talk is one of the big obstacles to people's reading speed. We do like one of the most involved like speed reading programs out there. And it's not just speed, it's also focus and comprehension, because it doesn't make sense to read something if you don't remember what you read, right? And that's why we do so much memory training. But one of the big obstacles, because somebody asked about that on the Facebook page, that keeps you from reading slowly is what's called sub-vocalization. Sub-vocalization. And what that means is sub meaning under, vocal meaning speech. That's your inner speech. Have you ever noticed when you read something, you hear that inner voice inside reading alongside with, reading along with you? You hear that voice? Hopefully it's your own voice, like it's not like somebody else's voice. You don't hear like two or three voices. The reason why it's a challenge is if you have to say every single word to yourself, you could only read as fast as you could speak. That means your reading speed is limited to your talking speed and not your real thinking speed. Get that? So if you're saying the words, you can only read as fast as you could talk, as opposed to how fast you could really think. But you don't have to see a stop sign and say, stop, right? You know what that word means. And 95% of all words you know by sight. You don't have to take your time to pronounce it. Anyway, that inner talk is what gets in the way of your memory a lot also, because it distracts you. I would recommend that everybody, literally what they do is they just listen. If you spell out the word listen, by the way, and then you change the words, the letters around a little bit, what is it also spelled? The letters that make up the word listen. Look at it for a second. Silent, right? It's also spelled silent, and that's the best thing you can do to be able to observe. And then finally, the second M in mom stands for mechanics. And the mechanic is not the person that fixes your car, but the technique, the strategy, the skill, the tip, the idea that you apply to have a better memory. And that's what Kwik recall and all the memory training that we do is based on. But if you don't have the motivation to want to remember something and you don't pay attention, the tips are probably not going to help a whole lot. All right. But let me give you one right now. I want you to remember be suave. All right. Be suave. And I'm going to go through this one really, really quick. All right, so next time you're at a business function, you're at a wedding, you're around, a social event, and you're checking the mirror for your tie or your makeup, I also want you to do a self-check with yourself and say to yourself, I'm going to be suave. Besuave. Be suave. And the first B in be suave, the B in be suave stands for believe. If you believe or don't believe, either way, you're right, right? And so if you believe you can, either way, you're right. Henry Ford said that. And so you want to check your negative self-talk because a lot of people, my experience, and we do our programs are available, people going through it from 80 different countries. And when I talk to people from all ages, all backgrounds, all careers, all levels of education, people come sometimes and they say, well, my memory is horrible. I remember I was training for marathon, right? With a name like Kwik, and hopefully you'll remember my name after today. The name like Kwik, my life and my destiny was pretty much planned out. I had to be a runner back in school. I have to be very careful when I'm driving because you don't want to get pulled over for speeding when your driver's license says Kwik right on it because you're not talking your way out of that ticket. And I get to teach speed reading and speed recall, speed learning. But when it comes to running, I was preparing for this marathon and I was reading a book on not the physical training, but the mental training because that's what I was really concerned about. One of the chapters opened up like this. Your brain is like a supercomputer, and your self-talk is the program it will run. So if you tell yourself, I am not good with names, you will not remember the name of the next person you meet because you programmed your computer not to. And isn't that telling? That's the power of a belief, right? And so you want to check negative beliefs and be able to rewrite over it and replace it with something more encouraging because your mind is always eavesdropping on your self-talk. Your mind is always, always eavesdropping on your self-talk. The E in Be Suave, the first D stands for exercise. And I don't mean physical exercise, although I think 3 of the previous experts talked about how physically active they are, how important it is to your memory, including when Michael Gelb was talking about Leonardo da Vinci and how physically fit he was. Exercise, because what's good for your heart is good for your head. But I don't mean physical exercise in this case. I mean practice, because practice makes what? See, it doesn't really make perfect because perfect practice makes perfect. But I also think that perfect is so unattainable because it's such a kind of a interesting standard because you can never be perfect. There's always some other place you could go, right? And so I think practice makes progress, or practice makes permanent would be even more accurate. Like I could practice typing with 2 fingers, but I'm never going to be a perfect typer because the strategy I'm practicing doesn't enable for it. Just like when a lot of people read, for example, they read like with 2 fingers. And then, when I was growing up in school, I remember my first typing class and it was a typewriter, right, before computers. And I'm thinking like, wow, and I was a really fast typer. And I wasn't naturally good at a lot of things, but typing was something I had because when I visit my grandparents and they would watch me, they had no toys, and all they had for me to play with was this rusty, dusty typewriter. And so I would just entertain myself there, and I was a fast typer because I invented this 2-finger method where I would use my index finger and kind of hunt and peck, and I would be a fast typer. Now, fast forward when school started teaching you in middle school how to type, they let you type and play with it. And I was like the fastest typer. And it was really neat because on the blackboard, they would write, Jim Kwik, and I'd be the fastest typer words per minute, just like they do reading speed words per minute. And, but something interesting happened. After a few days, the teacher's like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to type. And I was like, whoa, I want to take the test now. I could teach people how to type. And you're like, no, like she's like, that you're doing it wrong. You want to use all your fingers, and these are your home keys and such. And I tried it, and what do you think happened to my typing speed? It went so down. And it was so like it went so down. It went so down my typing speed. So what do you think I go back to doing? I go back to typing with my 2 fingers because I know better, right? Like a lot of us do. And what happened was my friends, after a week of practicing, what do you happen to their typing speed? It went up. And what happened to my typing speed? It stayed the same. And then a week later, my friends are typing faster than me. And then after that, a lot faster than me. And I realized, and my slow brain realized that, hey, that's not fair. They're using 5 times more fingers. Like I literally have to work 5 times harder to get the same kind of results. I began to plant the seed as like, wow, working smarter is a whole lot better than working smarter. And I mean, working harder. And so that's the lesson there. So practice makes permanent, or practice makes progress. Because the bad news is it takes practice to remember names. But here's the good news. It doesn't take as much as you think. If you've ever seen me perform or meet lots of people and such, remember their names. I learned that so long ago, like 20 years ago or such, and I practiced it for the first few months. But after you could do it, you don't get much better, right? It's like learning how to drive a car or learning how to ride a bike or learning how to type. Once you know how to type, you have that skill. And so the good news is it doesn't take as much as you think. And practice, the question becomes how and where can you practice? Well, I'm showing you the how in terms of what to do. That's the suave. But where you practice is wherever you meet a human being, right? And so when you're at the grocery store, I used to go into the grocery store and just make up names with people who would walk in with me. I'm like, oh, that's Mary, that's Bob, that's Sue. And then later on, when I'm leaving, I'm checking out, I see them in the aisles. I was like, oh, what's that person's name? Oh, that's Sue. Who's that? That's Bob, that's Mary. And I would practice, because what you practice in private, you're rewarded for in public. I think Tony Robbins said that. What you practice in private, you're rewarded for in public. And that's the beautiful thing. All right, so practice, and it's worth it. Well, I mean, and I sound a little bit passionate about this because these are your memories, right? Without your memories, when I first learned these skills, I would be fanatical about it, because I would think like, why doesn't everyone want to learn this? Because this is everything. And if you're good at, for example, with your memory, like learning is remembering. And Jim Kwik didn't say that, Socrates said that. And I was thinking like, wow. And then, we all have people in our lives that have brain aging and dementia and Alzheimer's. And if you've ever had that experience, or you have, a loved one going through it, it is tough. I used to go to senior centers, and I still do to this day. And I don't teach them techniques. What I do is I'm there, and I just want to help them polish up their memories, to talk about their history, to share their stories, because that's like the greatest gift. Anyway, the reason I'm sharing this with you, and it's not always like a strategy or a tip, there's lots of ideas out there. I think the strategy is important, but what quick learning really is, it's a combination of not just strategy, but it's also a level of attitude, a level of attitude of an incredible fascination and curiosity, an excitement for learning, a childlike approach, because I really do believe attitude determines your altitude in life, and more than even anything. And I do believe that success, 80% of it is it's psychology, and that's a big part of it. I think that a lot of us know the things we should be doing, but we don't do it. And I think that's the gap. And that's why this Superheroes Summit is meant to be full of information, but also inspiration as well. Anyway, that's the B. So the B to review is believe, E is exercise. So let's get to the suave. This is the technique, 5 simple steps. When you meet somebody for the first time, the S means you say it. You say their name. Somebody introduces themselves to you. The first thing you do is you say, Sue posts something really great. I was like, Sue, it's nice to meet you. Roxanne, it's a real pleasure. Jane, have a great day. So I say the name, right? And so that's the first thing. The U in suave stands for use the name. I use the name. Now notice I use it in conversation. Now notice I use it, USE, not abuse it, ABUSE. It would be too much to go to somebody and say, let's see, Philip from San Francisco. Philip, it's really nice to meet you. Philip, what would you like to cover on this call today? Philip, well, have a great day. That would be an abuse, right? So you want to use it 3 or 4 times in the context of the conversation. And the A in suave stands for ask. Remember that everyone's favorite subject it's not golf, it's not travel, it's not shopping, it's themselves, right? And so you want to ask about a person's name. Now this is really great when you meet somebody that has a different kind of name than you're used to, right? Because 90% of the names that you meet, a Mike, a John, a Mary, a Sue, a Jim, I have a very common name myself, but every once in a while you meet somebody that has a different name that you're not used to. What can you ask about a person's name? Say it out loud. And don't worry if somebody's looking at you. You're always you can be on your phone or anything else like that. But what can you ask? You could ask about how do you spell it? Where are you from? Who are you named after? Are you related to this person? What does it mean? I remember I was doing this memory training for the country's um, for North America's largest life insurance company, and the training director's name was Nankita, and there was about 100 people in the room at the time. Training director Nankita, and I was like, wow, that's a beautiful name, and it has to be sincere because I'm fascinated with people's names. And so I was like, that's a beautiful name. How do you spell it? Where is it from? What does it mean? And then she pauses and she looks at her coworkers and she says it means graceful falling waters. I was like, wow, that's pretty neat. And then, some people in the audience like made some noises too, and it made me think. I was like, Nankita, how long have you worked here? She was like, about 4 years. I was like, with a lot of these people here? She was like, yeah, I have a lot of good friends here. And I asked the audience, her coworkers, how many people actually knew that's what her name meant? And out of a room of 100 people, how many raised their hand? Not one. Not one person. So there's a big, big difference, and then all of a sudden I created this bond, right? So you ask about a person's name, which builds like your memory of that person. And then finally, the V and the E. The V stands for visualize. Visualize, meaning how many people are much better with faces than they are with names? If you're better with faces, like you go to somebody and say, hey, I remember your face, but I forgot your name. It's never the opposite. You never walk up to someone and say, hey, I remember your name, but I forgot your face. That wouldn't make any sense. And so the reason why is we tend to remember more of what we see because more of your brain is committed and responsible for visual, right? Your visual cortex. And there's a Chinese proverb, by the way, that goes, what I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. And what I do, I understand. For yourself also, because remember, what you teach, you get to learn twice. What I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. And what I do, I understand. And those are the different learning styles, right? In terms of auditory, in terms of visual, in terms of kinesthetic. But so what I'm saying here is if you tend to remember what you see, then try seeing what you really want to remember. Try seeing what you really want to remember. Meaning, if somebody you meet, let's say that their name is Mike, what could you picture if you're a child to remind you that person's name is Mike? And you would say, well, I would picture them singing on a microphone. Great. And how do you take it to the next level? Imagine them jumping on a table and singing karaoke on a microphone, right? And you would remind you that that person's name is Mike. And if it makes you smile and makes you laugh, that's why you remember it, because emotion tied to information becomes knowledge. Emotion tied to information becomes knowledge, right? We all know where we were. Like I'm sure that there's a certain song or a certain scent, a certain baked good, a certain cooking that takes you back years ago because that emotion tied information helped to store it in long term. All right, so if and remember, who are the fastest learners on the planet? Children. And I don't know about you, but how many people had their name made fun of, right? With a name like Kwik. And that's how children learn. They make fun of names. That's how they learn. And so if a person's name is let's say is David, I picture like a slingshot. For David and Goliath. I just imagine just using a slingshot to hit their glasses, right? And this, by the way, this is in the privacy of your own mind. And even when it doesn't work, it still works because what it gets you to do is focus on the person and focus on the name, right? Remember that observation that's so important? So even when it doesn't work, it's more likely to work because it gives you more things to be able to remember. So if a person's name is Carol, what could you picture? Like Christmas caroling? That would be perfect, right? So you could picture that. If a person's name, for example, is Jane, what can you picture? Exactly. If a person's name is Mary, what do you picture? Mary, right? And so imagine they're getting married, or imagine they have, Mary had a little lamb. Imagine meeting someone named Mary, and you imagine them holding a lamb underneath their arms, right? A little bit crazy, and that's why you remember it. Person's name is John. You could picture what? whatever it is you picture. All right, so that's the V. And then the E stands for end. You leave saying goodbye, ending with their name, right? Danielle, thank you for coming. Augusto, it's been a real privilege. Kaylee, have a wonderful day. Sue, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for all your wonderful posts on the comment section, right? And so you end, because if you could walk into a room and meet 20 strangers and leave saying goodbye to every single one of them, that's a superpower. Remembering names is a superpower. I've been talking to a lot of people in business, right? We have an opportunity to work at some of the finest organizations, from Virgin to Nike to Harvard to Fox Studios, to Zappos. And I could tell you, remembering people's names has got to be one of the highest skills or best forms of business etiquette, and networking certainly. So I would really get good at that. And there's so much more here also as well, in the area of remembering names, but that's just one or two techniques. Now, what I would like to do is do a little bit of a game with you. What I like to do now is I like to give you, let's say that I was in front of the audience and I memorized um, like a list of words, right? They passed around the mic and gave me a list of words in and out of order. And so you can see this on, if you go to superheroU.com, you can see some of my presentations where I'll memorize a list of random words out of order. So someone will say 17 is this, and 12 is this, and 1 is that, and 20 is that, and so on. And I'll give it back to them in forwards and backwards. Now what I'll say, now it's your turn. Okay? Now I'm going to test you because I really do believe, whether it's the memory training or the speed reading training that we do, that what you measure, you can manage. And what I love about it, it's very, very measurable. You can measure someone's reading speed. You can measure their comprehension. You can measure how many names that they can remember out of 20, right? You can memorize a list of words. So before we start talking about how to remember what you read, fundamentally, you need to be able to remember words, because the words are like the building blocks. The only other difference is, for our programs, often people say, I want to be a better speller, and that's all memory, right? And I used to work with kids, helping them, spelling bees and be better spellers and such like that, because that's important also as well. Not so much with technology, but nowadays we're outsourcing everything to technology. We're outsourcing our brains to technology, right? It keeps all our phone numbers, it does math for us, it gets us from here to there. And in a lot, I was talking to one doctor, they said that smartphones are actually making you stupid. So what I want to do here is I want to challenge your brain right now, and I want to give you a list of words. And instead of 20 words out of order, I'm going to give you just 10 words in order. All right. And what I want you to do, to the best of your ability, memorize these 10 words. Now, you're definitely capable of doing it because it's only 10 words. And just to make it a little bit harder, I won't, I'll give them to you kind of like fast, because they're only 10 words. Okay. So get ready. So put yourself in a peak state that you're about to learn something and practice. Put your pens down. Do not write this down, because we're testing your memories. All right, ready? Water bottle, balloon, battery, barrel, board, diamond, night rider, ox, toothpaste, sign. Okay? Now that was 10. Do not write it down yet. Don't cheat either. Do not write it down. Now what I'd like you to do is just take out a piece of paper, or if you're on your phone or if you're on the computer, just write down as many of the 10 as you remember. And if you didn't understand all the words, that's okay too. And sometimes we don't understand all the words that that we learn. All right, I'm going to go through these words again. Now I'm going to give them to you, okay? And I want you to check how many you remembered, okay? Water bottle, balloon, battery, barrel, board, diamond, night rider, ox, toothpaste, sign. Okay. And again, what you put in is what you get out. All right, now what I'm going to do is, this is a simple memory test, right? And I want you now to teach me. Now you are the expert. You are the expert, because, if you got any of them right, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, your memory works, right? You just need to learn how to work your memory. So specifically what I mean is, it's not magic. There's always a method behind the madness or the magic. So specifically, if you remembered some of these words, there's a reason why. There's always a reason. It's not just because. What I'm trying to do with this series of this brain power series, the inspiration was, I want people to go inside their mind and really admire and assess like how their brain works, so they could work their brain. Because for a lot of people, it's this black box. Like, you could see your fingers, right? And you could see your legs. You could see different parts of your body and your hair and such, but you can't see your brain. So I want to let you know that there's reasons why you remembered some of these and not all of them. The words you remember, I want you to post one word and why you think you remembered it more than others. Like, there's certain principles that make the the world and universe work, right? There's this phenomenon of, let's say, gravity, example, right? But there's also these principles of learning and principles of memory. So repetition definitely helps you retain something. Okay, let's say, okay, a lot of people remembered water bottle because it was first. Okay, so water bottle because it was first. And so you remember things that are first. So not only does repetition help your memory, but things being first help your memory. If you go to a party, probably the first people you meet at that party, you're going to remember, right? If you give you a list of 20 words, you probably remember the words in the beginning, and that's important. You tend to remember the last one, which was sign, because that was last. So that's just kind of works hand in hand, right? Same thing, you go to the same party, you remember the people in the beginning of the party and the people that you spent the last time with the party, right? Let me give you the actual words for this. First, there's a word called primacy. Primacy. Last, it's called recency. Recency. Meaning, primacy means you remember things in the beginning. Last, or recency, means you tend to remember things at the end or more recent. All right. And how that you could apply that right now to a lot of your studies. Like a lot of people put, that they want to remember what they read and remember what they're studying because they're preparing for things in their career or their school. Is a lot of people, they didn't study in school, right? They actually crammed, right? And I don't think I was the only one that was guilty of this, but they wouldn't study for weeks and then they would just spend 5-6 hours straight just studying with no break. And what that means is if you can imagine like a graph where it starts up high on one side and then it goes down like a U and then it goes back up at the end and it ends at high, that high on the left is primacy, that high level on the right is recency, but everything in between you lose, right? Because you tend to remember things in the beginning and things at the end. Instead, what you want to do is be able to take breaks. The reason why our calls are only about 60 minutes is because if you take, let's say, 6 hours straight, you have that big hole in the middle that you don't remember as much. But if you imagine you take a break every hour and split up that 6 hours in different breaks, like a 5-minute break, then you create a lot more beginnings and a lot more ends. You create a lot more firsts and a lot more lasts. You create a lot more primacy and a lot more recency. So you pick up a lot more. So instead of being one big U, then you have this divided by 6. You have these small little drops, but then you get up really fast. So it goes to low to high very more quickly. Okay, what other words did you tend to remember besides the first and the last? Toothpaste, because toothpaste, it was something that was familiar, so I'd write that down. So a quality or a principle of memory is not only repetitions, not only first, not only last, but familiarity. Don't you tend to remember things that are familiar to you? For example, don't you remember someone's name sometimes better if you have a relative or a good friend that has that same name, right? Because it's familiar to you. So that's why some people remember toothpaste. Lenora remembers because she visualized things. Yes, exactly. So maybe some of these you remember because you made a picture of it. So I would write that. You made something visual. So that's a principle of recall, that you tend to remember things that you see. So if you took the time, which is really a heartbeat, to be able to picture one of the words, then you're more likely to remember it because a picture is worth what? 1,000 words, right? Very good. Okay, here's kind of interesting. Some people remember all the B's because it went from balloon to battery to barrel to board. And I would call that organization, right? There's organized, or it's like, if another word for it is chunked. Like if you chunk certain things together, like if I gave you a list of 20 words and asked you how to memorize them, most people would get 5 to 9 words, right? It's George Miller's study out of Harvard saying we remember 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information consciously, right? So 7 minus 2 is 5, 7 plus 2 is 9. We can only hold 5 to 9 bits. So it's like a phone number, right? But anything past that is pretty much, not really, unless you have a system like we're teaching you. So maybe you remember the 4 B's are part of those 4 B's because it's organized. Like if I give you a list of 20 words and ask you to memorize, maybe come up with 5, 6, 7. But if I tell you like afterwards, I say, okay, they fall in these 4 categories. They are fruits, they are state capitals, they are presidents, and they are colors. how many more are you likely to remember? Because they're organized, right? So organization is another principle of memory. So far we have things like repetition. We have first, we remember things that's last, we remember things that are familiar, we remember things that are visual, we remember things that are organized. Because what we're teaching ourselves, what you're teaching each other is you're the memory expert, you remembered certain things, and there's a reason why. And that's what I love about this. These aha, it's like there's a reason why you forget things, and there's a reason why you remember. Some people remembered because they associated it to something else. And that's kind of interesting. So I would put association there. Association meaning that they took, like one person here, they took something and they connected it to something else. Now that's interesting, right? And so I think that a lot of learning is association. And in fact, I would say all learning has to do with taking something on the outside, like something you don't know, and connecting it to something you already know, right? And so it's kind of like if I say dog, you say what? Cat, right? If I say cat, you say what? Mouse. I say mouse, you say cheese. I say cheese, you say Swiss. I say Swiss, you say Alps. I say Alps, you say, and it goes on and on and on. That's how your memory works, is through association. And just finally, I just want to kind of just wrap up this particular exercise. Some people say they remember Knight Rider. Some people don't know what Knight Rider is. I pulled that out because I know we have that same generation. We're going to be in this part of the series talking to MacGyver, the guy who created the creator of MacGyver, and that's kind of the same era. Knight Rider was this. It wasn't the name of the car, of the Trans Am. That was Kit. Knight Rider was the character in the television series with the black Trans Am. But Knight Rider was one, and some people remember that. And I would say that principle was because it was outstanding. And I would list that because we tend to remember things that stand out, right? You don't remember what you did necessarily last week, Tuesday, right? Unless it was something outstanding happened, right? Something that was unusual happened. So we tend to remember things that are outstanding and unusual. One other thing that was posted here that I wanted to bring out was some people remember diamond. Because Marianne, it glittered in my mind, right? And so some things stand out because there's an emotion to it also, right? There's an emotion. So I would add, as a principle to memory, I would add emotion. Because remember what we talked about earlier, emotion tied to information becomes knowledge. It becomes long-term memory. And so the feeling it has to be there. So let's stop there. Obviously, we could go deeper, but we probably covered all 10 things and realized that there's a reason why we remembered some of them. We repeated it. It was first. It was last. We were familiar with it. We visualized it. It was organized. We associated it to something else. It was unusual or outstanding enough for us to be able to remember it. It had some kind of unconscious or conscious emotion to it. But those are the kind of things I'm talking about. And when I'm doing this exercise with you, I'm teaching you again that it's not a matter of luck. It's not a matter of magic. That there's real science, there's real reasons why certain things get recalled and some things don't. And then obviously focus, right? If you're not paying attention, you didn't hear it to begin with. Now, what I want to do now is I want to take these qualities, these principles of recall, and I want to put it into a technique to help you memorize this list now. So when we're done with this, you'll be able to memorize all 10 words. So what I'd like you to do is, if it's safe, I want you to take a deep breath, exhale, close your eyes if it's safe. Like if you're not driving, operating heavy machinery, just breathe normal. And the only reason I ask you to close your eyes is it helps some people to focus better with their imagination. They don't have the external distractions. And what I'd like you to do is I want you to imagine a water bottle. And now as you're picturing it in your mind, I want you to notice what brand it is, the size of it, the colors that are on it. And even if you can't imagine it clearly, pretend you are. Pretend it's right in front of you. All right? Now what I'd like you to do is I want you to imagine tied to this water bottle is a gigantic balloon, helium balloon. In fact, there are many balloons tied to it. Many helium balloons tied to the water bottle. So many so it's actually floating up in the air. And look it in the air. And I want you to notice what color the balloon is. Say out loud what color your balloon is. Whatever color you just said, that's the color of your balloon. There's no right or wrong. All right? And when you see the balloon up there, I want you to notice out of nowhere, all these batteries come and they pop the balloon. They pop the balloon, all these batteries. And you're looking at the batteries, and what kind of batteries are they? AA batteries, C batteries, D batteries. What brand of batteries? Just say it out loud. What brand of batteries? Good. It's like a branding question. Energizer. No, it's Duracell. Good. And where are the batteries coming from? They're coming from this gigantic wooden barrel. A gigantic wooden barrel. Some guy's just throwing the batteries out of the barrel, popping the balloon. Look at the barrel full of batteries. Now, out from the barrel comes this snowboarder. It's a board. This big board, it could be a surfboard or a snowboarder, comes flying out of the barrel. So out of the barrel comes the board. And on the board, rolling on the board, is a diamond. Look at that diamond. And it's not like a half a carat or 1 carat or 2 carat diamond. It's a 94 carat diamond. A 94 carat diamond rolling down the board. And it falls and it lands right in the Knight Rider car. This black Trans Am, Knight Rider. And you see the diamond inside the car. And the car goes off. Knight Rider drives away. And Knight Rider parks right behind an ox. An ox. So it parks right behind this big animal, an ox. Maybe a parallel parks between two of them. Ox. And you look at the ox and it's kind of strange because it has really bad breath. And you go there and it's bothering you so much, you go and actually brush its teeth with toothpaste. Toothpaste. So you put yourself putting toothpaste all over the ox. Toothpaste all over the ox. Notice what brand it is. Notice like how it smells. Use all your senses. Because that's what we're doing. We're taking the ordinary, making it extraordinary. Remember we talked to Michael Gell about sensory and synesthesia and using all the senses. We're developing that right now. Toothpaste all over the ox. And then when you're done with the toothpaste, you throw it, and the toothpaste goes all over this big superhero U, this big neon sign, this big superhero U neon sign, and it explodes. Toothpaste all over the sign. All right. Now, with your eyes closed, as long as it's safe and you're good to do that, I want you just to imagine doing what we just did again, starting with the water bottle all the way to the neon sign. With your eyes closed. Breathe and just go. Just have fun with it. You're playing a game. You're activating your mind, your imagination, your memories. Remembering everything easily and effortlessly. All right, good. Now, let's walk through it again now. I want to walk through and I want you to say out loud and pretend I'm there, even I'm doing this with you. All right, and just I'm doing it with you and say out loud the first thing. Say it out loud. Good. Water bottle. After that, what happened to water bottle? Balloon. Good. After balloon, what did you have after balloon? Say it out loud. Battery. Good. Where do the batteries come from? Barrel. Good. What comes out of the barrel? The board. What was on the board rolling down? Diamond. You see the diamond, right? It lands right in the front seat of what? Knight Rider's car. Knight Rider. And then it parks right behind the what? Ox. Good. And after ox, what did you do? Toothpaste. And then what did you throw the toothpaste? Sign. Excellent. Now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to list down how many you're able to get. If you're able to get more the second time than you did the first time. And basically what we're doing is that we took the things that you said helped you remember something and we just put it into like a little technique. Very simple technique that exercises your mind, your imagination, really your right brain, right? Because the left brain is your words and your language and your sounds. But what most people aren't activating as much is their right brain. So even when we're talking about reading, and I want to talk a little bit about studying in a little bit, so I want you to think about a subject that really was difficult for you in school. But even when we're reading, it's very left brain. It's words, linear, and sound, right? Our subvocalization, our self-talk. But what we wanted to do is we don't just want you to hear the words in order. We want you to get the right brain experience of the words, imagine the words, feel the words, create the words and experience. And that's all right brain. Much like memory, where somebody gives you 10 words to memorize, you try to do left brain, logical, linear, with sound and repetition. That's left brain, right? But what about the emotion on the right brain? What about the creativity? What about the imagination? What about the systems organization of the right brain? Right? So all of quick learning that I teach, whether it's speed reading or memory or more, has everything to do with whole self learning. Whole self learning, meaning it's not just, you know, whole brain learning where it's left and right, but it's also like, our previous conversations with other people, conscious, unconscious. It's always using lifestyle in terms of your diet, like we talked about, Doctor with Tana Amen. It's also about using your multiple intelligences and thinking patterns, like Michael Gell, Leonardo da Vinci. It's also about accessing your 3 different brains, like we talked about with Rudy Tanzi and such. It's all this stuff about thinking and doing, and so it's all combined, right? And there's never one like quick fix for anything. I used to say just do as much as you can. Even when we're talking about be suave, if you don't want to believe, and say the name and visualize it, great. Then just, exercise, just use the name and just, end with the person's name or ask about it. As long as you do part of it, then you're going to get, it's better than doing nothing. And that's where most people are. They're passive learners. They expect information just to be pushed inside their brain as opposed to them creating the information. Right? And that's the difference. They say that, and this is not a slight on teachers at all, because I get to work with a lot of educators. My mother is a school teacher. My aunt is as well. But there's a quote that's from Rip Van Winkle that said, or somebody else that said, if Rip Van Winkle, woke up after a deep sleep after, decades, the only thing he would recognize is the education system. And the challenge is the old, when schools were started and, and they would have like the teachers chant something to the students, the students would have to chant it back, and the teachers would chant it again, and the students would chant it back. That's why they call it rote learning. Rote is like rotary, like a wheel, or like a wheel. That's what it actually means. Like if you're part of a Rotary Club, the symbol is a wheel. The first half of the wheel is the teacher chanting. The second half is the students chanting, and that's what's turning the wheel, and you just keep on going. And then after doing it 50 times, you got it. The challenge is, in today's day and age, you don't have the time for that kind of repetition. You have to use, instead of in terms of frequency or duration, you need intensity. Intensity, get it done fast, and get it done where you're going to remember it. And that's what whole self-learning is really all about, that you learn at your very best in a way that's fun and fast. Now, let's, because I do want to get to, we covered names, we covered a list of words, and I hope you enjoyed that you're able to get more. And even if you weren't able to get all of them, but just recognize that success breeds success, and you can build on success. Where did I visualize? Where did I not associate? Where did I not organize? Where did I not make it outstanding or unusual, make it bigger and like lots of balloons or lots of batteries? How did it make me feel? You know what I mean? So that's what we're talking about. After that, though, what I want you to do now is list a subject in school that really was difficult. I want to talk about some of the reading and stuff like that. But let's relate back to school. What classes was just a lot of memorization? Classes that you had to be able to memorize stuff and remember. And I want to show you an example of how to apply this towards things you want to read or study. But I want to get a good example back in high school, something we could all relate to. So what kind of classes did you need to be able to memorize? Well, let's take science. What kind of science did you have a lot of memorization for? A lot of like memorization. And I hope what you're going to do after you learn what I'm about to show you is you're going to show like a lot of people. All right, so science, chemistry, physics, chemistry. All right, let's do this. Let's do chemistry, okay? What do you have to memorize in chemistry? Let's say chemistry was something you need to be able to memorize. Right? Would you need to memorize in the area of chemistry? It's been so long, right, since we've been back in high school. But like, think about the things that you would need to memorize that's like solid, something that is kind of the basis of whatever it was. Elements, like what's the name of that? What's the name of that chart? The table, yeah, okay, periodic table. So let's say you need to be able to memorize like the chemical elements on the periodic table. All right, now, I want you to notice, I want to go through and start memorizing some of this stuff, and I want you to know that how cool this is, because if we use this as example, for 99% of you, the periodic table probably doesn't really excite you. It's probably pretty technical, for you unless you're a scientist, and so it's difficult. And number three, it's probably not relevant at all to your life. No, okay, sorry. It's extremely relevant, the chemical elements to your life, for you being alive. But in terms of your day-to-day life, it's probably not very relevant, right? In terms of like, no one goes to you and say, hey, what's the atomic, number for this, or the element for this, or number 23. So notice, I'm going to help you memorize some of the elements on the periodic table. And if you could do it for this, something that's not relevant to your life, something that's technically difficult, and something you have zero excitement for, that's probably very boring for you, then you could apply it towards subjects that you really want to remember, that you have a background in, and that actually is relevant to your life, okay? So the elements, just for time's sake, I'm not going to ask you because you're all on Google and you could all look it up and stuff. Let's do the first 10 or 20 elements, right? It's hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon. Actually, let's stop there because we're already like kind of over time with the call. So what I want you to see now is this. Those are the first 10 elements, right? And you just trust me, those are really it. Some of you, I could just be making up names. Magnesium. So hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and neon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that's 10, right? So now here's the technique that I'm going to teach you. All right, we're going to do the same thing, and this time we're going to create a technique called chain linking. Remember when I talked about dog, you think of cat, you think of mouse, you think of cheese, you think of Swiss, you think of Alps, you think of skiing, you think of hot chocolate, whatever you think of, right? What we're going to do is the ultimate tip is TIP. TIP means turn into a picture. You turn into a picture. And because we tend to remember what's visual. And then when you have that visual, what you're going to do is combine it with another of the principles, which is association. So you're going to take that picture and connect it to another picture. You're going to associate it. But here's the thing. Remember Knight Rider, we have to make, we have to make it outstanding and unusual. In fact, what glues the two pictures together are what I call the vowels. The vowels. What are the vowels? A, E, I, O, U. A stands for action, E stands for emotion or exaggeration, I stands for illogical, O is going back to outstanding and unusual, right? So what glues one piece of information to another, because that's what we define as learning and memory, is that association. But what glues it is action, exaggeration, emotion. You make it illogical, you make it outstanding, you make it unusual. So it's glued there, and that's a lifelong memory. All right. And these are the things that you told me help you remember things. So what we're going to do is the first thing you do is turn into a picture. So if I want to remember hydrogen, right, what you're going to do is you're going to come up with a kind of like Pictionary. I don't know if you've ever played this game at parties called Pictionary. Basically, you get in two teams and somebody gives you like a card and you have to get your team to say what's on that card, like a movie or something, but you can't talk. You have to just draw. And so it's all in pictures. So if I needed you to remind you that the first element of the periodic table is hydrogen, what would remind you of hydrogen? All right, what would remind you of hydrogen? And so what I would say here is something like, it's something that either you use for hydrogen, something that hydrogen is used for, so you could picture that. Or if you don't know what it is, then you have to come up with a sound alike. Because in Pictionary, if you don't know what the word is, then you draw an ear, right? And it sounds like this, right? That's what we're doing sometimes with people's names. If you can't remember someone's name and you can't picture it, you come up with something that sounds like it. Because then if you can't remember it, how many people with names do this? Oh, does it start with a B? Does it start with a C, D, E, F, G, all the way? And you get really nervous when you get to like W, right? Because there are not many letters after that. But yeah, sometimes a letter does remind you of the whole thing. So hydrogen, what could you use for hydrogen? All right, so let's actually use water. So just imagine a water bottle to remind you of hydrogen, right? H2O. So water. So imagine a water bottle, okay? So that's the first thing. Now you just have to take the second element and turn it into a picture also to help you remind you. And so the second element is helium. What could you picture for helium? Okay, all Okay. All right. So why don't we use a balloon, a helium balloon? So now what you do is just glue it together, right? So imagine you just take the water bottle that represented hydrogen and take the balloon that represented helium and put them together. So what could you picture? Like maybe a water bottle and tied to it a whole bunch of balloons, all right? Just imagine that, a water bottle tied to it a whole bunch of balloons. Great. The third element that you need to remember is lithium. Lithium. Now, do you know what lithium is used for? Or what do you use for lithium? What's lithium used for? Let's picture batteries. Okay, lithium batteries. So imagine, yes, the water bottle's there, balloons go up, take the water up, and then just associate the batteries to the balloon. Like imagine like lots of batteries come and they pop the balloon out of nowhere. Maybe lots of batteries come and they just pop the balloon. Imagine that, all right? So batteries remind you of lithium. Very good. All right, so now you have all right, so you have your water bottle, the balloons carry it up, batteries come pop it. The next thing you have to remember is beryllium. What could you picture? What sounds like beryllium? What could you picture that sounds like it also? Beryllium. What could remind you of, you're not sure what it is, but the next element is beryllium. Okay, so you can picture a barrel, right? A barrel full of batteries popping the balloon that's holding carrying up the water bottle, right? And out of the barrel, you need to be able to picture the next thing, which is boron. Boron. What could remind you of boron? What sounds like boron? Like it would remind you of maybe something like a board. Like a board maybe remind you of a boron. Like you're not sure what the next element is, and someone says, "Oh, well, it kind of sounds like board." You wouldn't go, "Oh, that's nitrogen," right? Or, "Oh, you made fluorine." You would say board. "Oh, boron," because you study this and that's your study, right? So just imagine like out of the barrel comes a big board. And what would remind you of carbon, right? Carbon. What could you picture for carbon? Diamond. You had the water bottle, the balloon carrying it up, the hydrogen balloon, the lithium batteries popping them, coming out from the beryllium. Out comes the board or the boron, and rolling on it is the carbon diamond, and the diamond falls into Knight Rider, which reminds you of nitrogen, and it parks behind the ox, which reminds you of oxygen, and you brush its teeth with fluoride toothpaste to remind you of the ninth element, and then you throw the toothpaste into a big neon sign to remind you the 10th element is neon. And you could just kind of go on and on and on. But I mean, so you're like, wow, that takes a little while. No, it takes a little while to explain, but to actually do it is really fast. And if you wanted to do it for the next 10 or the next 20 or the next 30 or the next 40 or the next 50, the chain linking method is a wonderful way, a wonderful technique to be able to memorize things better with more effectiveness and just have fun with it also. What I love about the quick learning or the superhero you journey, it's about taking the ordinary and making it extraordinary. Because by itself, the 10 elements or a phone number or a list of to-dos or formulas, they're inherently not too exciting, right? And so if interest really is the grandfather or the grandmother of learning, how do you make it interesting inside? You can't maybe do it on the outside, but inside your mind, you have a canvas, right? You have this movie theater of a brain that you could picture things, and you can increase the sounds, you can increase the vibrance, you can increase the imagination, the colors, you could put yourself into it. And that's why even when I talk about speed reading, I remember when I first learned these skills, and you could use it to memorize things like, a to-do list, things like grocery list or anything like that, or study list, or even the things that's on these calls. But what this is all about, when I was, for example, learned the speed reading techniques a couple dozen, 20 years ago or whatever, there was a movie out that came out, and it was a John Grisham book with Tom Cruise, and he played a lawyer for the mob, and it was called The Firm, right? And a bunch of friends wanted to go see it, and I was like, well, I didn't read the book yet. And have you ever been in that situation? Like the book comes out, but you haven't read, the movie comes out, but you haven't read the book yet, and then you never get a chance to read the book because, you have lots of books on your shelf you haven't read yet. You never get past the first chapter, and so you never get to watch the movie. So friends wanted to go say, hey, let's go. I was like, oh, I didn't read the book. So I grabbed the book and I run to the car, and we go to movie theater. We get to the theater, and they say, hey, should we get you a ticket? I was like, no, I'm gonna stay here and just read my book. And they're like, fine, and then they go in and watch the movie. I start the book, and I finish the book. And I'm all excited about my new like found reading skills, right? My superpower. And then I finish the book, and then they come out later and after the movie, and they're like, I was like, how's the movie? And they're like, well, it was okay. They're like, how's the book? I was like, the book was awesome. I really enjoyed the book, because it doesn't matter. They can't. And even if you see John Grisham, in interviews, he's like, what they do to my movie, right? But nobody could do, even George Lucas and Disney, what they're going to do to the next Star Wars #7. No one could do what you could do in your own mind. No one could do what you could do in your own mind. And once you taste that power, and I don't mean power over anybody else but yourself, just like what we're talking to Tana Amen about the delicious food. Nothing tastes, I don't care the junk food that's out there, nothing tastes as good as clear, energetic feels in your mind. I wouldn't change that for anything. And I've been on this path just to help people, to bring people in and say like, hey, get a glimpse of what you're capable of. And you're gonna think, wow, why wasn't I taught this years ago? And who cares? You get to learn it now. And that's the whole point. I'll give you one final example. I see one of my students in Westchester, New York. We're here, our Superhero U headquarters, and our neighbors are the X-Men, for those of you who are comic book geeks. And I'm just going my neighborhood. I'm just, I always do my health food store I use to go to the gym or whatever. And I see one of my students, and he's like, hey, I took your class. Like, yes, I remember. How you doing? He's like, oh, really interesting story. I always let people read whatever they want to read in our speed reading class, because it's very practical. It doesn't take time. It's net, no extra time, because one of the biggest time wasters that people have is reading. And because they could spend 3 hours a day reading, and if I could at least double their reading speed, which is very realistic, and they save an extra 90 minutes a day, or even 60 minutes a day, an hour a day over the course of 365 days is how many hours? It's 365 hours. How many 40-hour work weeks? If you've taken our program with the human calculator, if you watch that video, it's 9 40-hour work weeks. That's 2 months of productivity, just saving an hour a day on reading, on emails, on websites, on books, newspapers, everything. Because leaders are readers, right? John F. Kennedy, Tony Robbins, all of Bill Gates. I got to meet him, and that's his superpower. Anyway, I see one of our students. He's reading a book. He said, "I have an interesting story for you. I was reading a book in your class, and I recently reread it after I graduated your program. It's like a 5-6 week program, and it was totally different." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, what book was it? I said, and it was The Old Man and the Sea. I don't know if you read that, The Old Man and the Sea, by Hemingway, right? Who Mariel Hemingway is actually one of our faculty, talking about some health and mental health stuff, and on Superhero U. But anyway, I was like, wow, The Old Man and the Sea. I was like, how is it different the second time? I didn't realize that he updated the book. I'm sure he didn't update the book, right? And and he's like, no, but the second time after your program, I felt like not only did I read it 3 times faster, I felt like I was in the book, meaning I was in the book. I could hear the ocean waves. I could feel the sand beneath my feet. The only thing I didn't like was the smell of the fish. And that's a true story. But that's the difference between left brain reading and whole self learning, whole brain reading, if you will, because they didn't just hear it, they experienced it, and that's all your right brain, very kind of abundant, very passionate obviously about this, is activating that right side of your brain, because for most people it's dormant. And then for most people, it's not encouraged in this society. For most educational systems, it's how do you read and how's your math? Right? That's the SATs, right? It's how's your verbal and mathematical skills. But what about musical? What about movement? What about creativity? What about visual arts? What about all the other areas that make us more of a whole brain learner? And that's why I take the time with going through these strategies for you and these visualization process for you. Because even if you're not going to use this strategy to get the result, use it to train your brain to use more of it. And so you could have that superhero mind. All right. I want to thank you for being in this conversation with me. This has been a little bit different kind of call than we have with the interview series, and but I'm just very passionate about it. So I was really glad to get my time with you and have you fully present. Thank you so much for all your comments here. If you want more information, we do not have a book. Actually, I think we're the only speakers or experts in here that does not have a book, just because it's just haven't had a time to put together a book yet. But if you want to find out more information about our programs, then like all the other speakers, go to superheroU.com/bookstore And we have a great deal for people that want to take our online speed reading memory programs. But I don't want to pitch on here, and obviously we make that big donation to the Pencils of Promise. But I just want to give you tools, because part of the superhero journey is learning, and if you want to be able to go deeper with something, we want to make those available for you. So I appreciate you so much for being on this call. Our team sends you so much love, because I feel like that we're kindred spirits. That if you're listening to me even late at night now as you are listening, or even on the replay, and you got to the end, then you're a special person. That there is probably a reason why we connected in the first place. I don't want to get completely metaphysical here, but I do believe that if you're listening to this here right now, then there's probably a reason, and it's probably not by accident. And that I hope that this information this evening and on this call and in this series is serving you to the utmost. And if I could be of any support in helping you to activate more of those powers so you could do more good at your work, more good with your family and your friends and to the world, then it would be my honor to be able to do that. So, and thank you so very much for tuning in. Share it with your friends. Teach them along with you. Join us on Facebook for the conversations that are to come. And remember to be suave. Use your chain linking. Remember your mom. And wish your days be full. Lots of love, lots of laughter, lots of life, lots of light. And of course, always, lots of learning. Thank you so much.